Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to What the Trans.
What the trans?
What the trans indeed. Ashley, how are you this fine whenever people are listening to this?
Yes, indeed. A very time zone appropriate salutation to all of our listeners, and I'm fine, really. It's been a busy week. I think that's a trend that's probably going to continue until more or less the summer. So I'm just embracing it now. How about you?
I'm good. I was actually in the same room as you this last weekend when I did a thing at the LGBT Foundation teaching people how to mingle. As if
yes.
I'm an expert on this. I tend to hide in my room away from people, but the LGBT Foundation in Manchester seemed to believe that I know what I'm doing. So I went up and taught people how to talk to people at parties, and it was tremendous fun. Thoroughly recommend everyone going to the LGBT Foundation in Manchester and going to all of their events because they are smashing.
And, well, I think they would particularly recommend that everybody go to your events, because I was talking to the people, like, behind it, in between times, and they were full of lovely things to say about you. So jolly well done. It was a fun little workshop. But legit, though, that does have value, I think, because, like, mingling and networking and talking to people at parties and, like, making friends when you're a grown-up is really scary, and it's very, very difficult. So
yeah, I'm thinking about it. I do have some hard-earned experience in this. Like, I don't know if I've talked about this before, but one time I accidentally found myself at a genuine orgy, and that required some hardcore advanced mingling.
Yes.
Because I didn't really partake in any of the stuff going on upstairs, but I was definitely, I set up camp in the kitchen, and people would come down for breaks to get a cup of tea, and that's where I mingled the fuck out of them.
God. Yes, so you've mentioned that story.
It's like my favourite story. Yes. It makes my life sound so much more interesting than it actually is.
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple of things we want to do before we get started with the show proper, aren't there? So first of all, we have a guest.
Hello.
So a very warm welcome to Jackson King to the What the Trans podcast for this for this one episode, and maybe some others, I don't know, it depends how well we sweet talk him. But Jackson joining us tonight / today / this afternoon / whenever, to talk about his particular experiences and also get really snarky about the news. So, it's kind of the usual thing, really.
So how's your week been, Jackson?
Oh, how's my week been? So highlights of this week would include being invited back for a second interview. So fingers crossed that went well and that I'm going to get that job, because
excellent.
Employment can be quite useful living under capitalism.
For true.
And I also went to a screening of 2 films around the experiences of trans people of colour. So that was a really good kind of event to go to this week. Those films are called Pashida and Desire, and I heavily recommend those.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, but before we really get going with the news and our usual segments, however, there's something that we very much want to do first.
Yeah, we want to start by acknowledging the horrific events in New Zealand. At the time of recording, we know that 50 innocent people were killed and another 50 wounded in a horrific terrorist attack on 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. Our thoughts are with the victims and their families at this awful time. To any Muslims listening, trans or otherwise, we want to say that we are with you. We will stand with you. You do not deserve the shit that is thrown at you, and you have our love, solidarity and support. Ashley and I are not Muslims. We are not people of colour, so our understanding of your situation can only ever be academic. So if you want to talk to us, or if you ever want access to our limited platform to tell your story and get whatever message out that you want or need to, get us on Twitter at WhatTheTrans, or on our website, whatthetranspod.tumblr.com/contact, where you can contact us anonymously there or on various social medias. We want to listen.
And as for the rest of you, we need to take a stand against Islamophobia in whatever form it takes. So whether it's from a particularly racist uncle or to the elected class who wield their obscene power to spread hatred, Trans people of all kinds can know too well what it can feel like to be a hated minority in the eyes of the public. And looking at the front pages of the UK press, it is quite clear that many in this country hate Islam and those that follow it. So this hatred, which, while it's a fantastic money spinner for the gutter press, inevitably leads to violence. That is where hatred always leads. So it's up to us to protect and defend the innocent, and do whatever you can to stamp out the cancerous ideology that drove these men to commit the atrocities in Christchurch. So for hundreds of years, the Islamic world has been under attack in so many forms by the West, and we need to do better. Keep the victims of this and all hate-based atrocities in your thoughts, but also think of the ways that you can help to make things better. And most importantly, find Muslim voices, listen and signal boost in any way that you can, because we have to step up as a community now more than ever for all Muslims, trans or cis.
Alright, shall we get started with some terrible news then?
Yes, I think it's terrible news time.
So, there has been a fair bit in the news recently concerning trans people's access to gyms and their changing facilities. It all began on the 9th of March when a spokesperson for David Lloyd Gyms told the Huffington Post, and I quote, "Our policy is that unless the member holds a gender recognition certificate, transgender members must use the facilities designated for their birth gender. This policy, if it was true, may well be in direct conflict with both the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act. No one who provides a service to the public, with very few exceptions, is allowed to ask to see a gender recognition certificate. If anyone ever asks you for one at the entrance to a business or public service, they are probably breaking the law." The Huffington Post report went on to remind us that Dragon Den's Duncan Ballantyne had previously stated that he is against trans people using the facilities in line with their gender identity at his health clubs. And after the HuffPo David Lloyd story broke, he announced on Twitter that his health clubs have been doing that for a while in regards to David Lloyd's policy. He later rolled this back, sort of, by replying to a trans woman that she would be able to use the women's facility. So what's going on? Can trans people use Ballantyne health clubs and David Lloyd gyms without fear? We tried to investigate and we still don't really know. After several days chasing a comment, David Lloyd released to us a statement that appeared to claim the opposite of what they told the Huffington Post, saying, and I quote, "Contrary to recent comments, DLL does not have a practice of arbitrarily asking people for a gender recognition certificate or any other such documentation, and should an issue arise for any reason, we would trust and support our local teams to work with individual members one-to-one to resolve any problem sensitively and discreetly." Which is a very peculiar thing to say after you just said the exact opposite a few days before. But anyway, after this, we decided to call up several branches of David Lloyd's, pretending to be potential customers and asking them what their policy was. Not a single one said they knew what the policy was, and there appeared to be a lot of confusion amongst staff as to what the policy actually is. We can only confirm what David Lloyd's group have released to us at this time. We did the same with the Ballantyne Health Club's group and was met with similar confusion amongst staff in individual branches. We did try to get clarification of the trans customer policies from their PR company, but were met with a big fat no comment. Based on what we have found, the best advice we can give to the trans community is do not use David Lloyd's gyms or Ballantyne Health Clubs. At the very least, they don't understand equality law and made a couple of PR mistakes. And even if they do realise this and can affirm their trans inclusion, that is absolutely not the message that is being sent to their staff on the ground. Using any of these facilities is a roll of the dice, so we recommend that you look elsewhere to get your sweat on. We will of course be publishing the full statement we have received from David Lloyd on our website, link in the description of this podcast. And you know, I don't know if this is going to be true for every health place, but I regularly attend a sort of government-managed leisure centre just down the road from me in Streatham, and I've never had a problem there, so maybe that's the way to go. I mean, what do you guys think?
I think one thing that kind of struck me about this story is that really what the kind of initial statements around requesting a GRC seemed to be around were about passing. Because there was kind of a backlash on Twitter of a lot of kind of trans guys who I think don't have a GRC but do have fully grown beards, kind of saying, well, do you really expect me to use the women's changing room? And so it kind of just exposed the real kind of transphobia and cissexism of this idea that you kind of need a piece of paper to prove your gender.
And it's telling as well that once you get in touch with the sort of PR company, because that statement that was released to us, it could not have been more the opposite of what had been said by the CEO, which to me, this sounds like, this higher up spokesperson talking to the Huffington Post and saying, oh, well, this is our policy, without actually knowing what that policy is, which is then angrily clarified by their own legal team and PR department by saying, no, that's not what it is. You've just fucked that up and brought a massive load of bad press down on us. So I am sure the PR teams and assistants of the person who made that initial comment were absolutely thrilled that they then had to deal with this. But the point, it is absolutely correct that you can't ask for that gender recognition certificate. Basically, nobody gets to see that. And if you're asked for one, that literally can't be anywhere's policy because it's not allowed to be, essentially. So, and it is indeed in breach of the Equality Act. I know we've mentioned that there are sort of special circumstances, but that's very, very few and far between, as it tends to be case by case. And there haven't really been all that many cases of anybody invoking that clause as a way of saying, no, we don't want to provide service to X type of person. So this is all terribly disappointing, but it is literally just people not paying attention and people on the staff on the ground, who I've got no blame for, because chances are the staff on the ground are not necessarily there because they care deeply about the intricacies of equalities law. Chances are it's probably not going to be the greatest paid position. They're going to have a lot of stuff to do in terms of making sure that their lord and master's shareholders are absolutely satisfied by the cleanliness of the gym should they visit and all that sort of, low wage kind of thing. So to say, well, why aren't you reading the policy? It's like, well, I don't have time because I've got too much of the other stuff to get on with, which if I don't do, I'll get shouted at and I'm in danger of losing my job sort of thing. So...
yeah, exactly. Like, the few places I rang up, they didn't seem necessarily hostile to the idea. They just didn't know.
Yeah.
And, we've all worked, in a minimum wage, public-facing job. It's a hard job. They probably had 10 other things they had to think about at the time. So, if anybody thinks that we're, being down on the staff on the ground, that is not the case.
Hell no.
Our criticism is definitely at the people who make the decisions and not the people that work there that have no power.
Basically. This was kind of disappointing to see, but it's also not surprising because any large company that's got, people working at cross purposes, or as it would say in a job description, in a very challenging environment, which unfortunately that means that genuinely important things things that are related to equality and health and safety and policy and law don't actually get communicated out to the staff that need to know how to do it. And then people making ridiculous statements to the Huffington Post, which just spreads the whole thing around, adding to the confusion. But as far as we can tell, simply because of that lack of understanding, lack of knowledge by basically everybody that we spoke to at both of those gyms, it's like, go find somewhere else. Go find someone else. But even that is a difficult ask for a lot of people. We are all quite lucky in that sense. We live in cities, conurbations, metropolitan areas where there are going to be a certain number of LGBT-friendly facilities. For smaller towns and, out in the sticks, that is definitely not going to be the case.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't think of that. My head at the time was just everyone lives in a city.
Yeah,
that is not the case.
Well, I mean, again, I would point that out that's just London dweller syndrome all over.
Yeah,
so,
that's fair. That's fair.
I'm sorry, but anyway. So yeah, I mean, any final thoughts on this, anyone?
All I would say is that this definitely seems to have a weird stink of Duncan Bannatyne specifically being on Twitter saying really silly things, and then later on someone giving him a call saying, Duncan, what are you doing? Stop saying illegal things on Twitter. What are you doing?
That's a silly thing to do. It will definitely hurt our business model, at which point that's when he cares about it. So there you go. Oh well.
But anyway, what's next?
Well, next, in confusing mixed messages, there was some alarm among trans people earlier this week when the head of the Women and Equalities Committee, Maria Miller MP, said on the social media platform that the government's focus on the reformation of the Gender Recognition Act was a mistake. In the tweet, Miller said the main recommendations of the Women and Equalities Committee's 2015 trans inquiry was the Government Equalities Office should tackle discrimination in public services, in particular the NHS. The government should focus on trans discrimination that's already against Equality Act law and admit that prioritising changing GRA reform was a mistake. So a lot of people, understandably, read that as a sign that the government was about to completely abandon any Gender Recognition Act reform. So we at the podcast went to Mrs. Miller's people and asked for clarification, and we were told, and I quote, Maria was referring to a number of wide-ranging recommendations made by the Women and Equality Select Committee 2016 Transgender Equality Report. It is ultimately for the government to evaluate the arguments and evidence put forward and decide what actions to take. She went on to urge us to contact the Minister for Women and Equalities directly, which is exactly what we did. So we got in touch with the office of Penny Mordaunt, who is the Minister for Women and Equalities, and in response we were sent a fairly lengthy statement, which obviously we're going to put a link to in the description and on our website, but we were told by a source close to the Minister that there are no plans to change the Equality Act at the moment. So this means the only legal way to exclude a trans person from a protected space is through a comprehensive risk assessment of a particular person, as we mentioned in the previous story. You cannot exclude somebody because they are trans according to the law as it is, and there are no changes planned for this particular law. However, the statement we received were unable to comment on the plans for the Gender Recognition Act reform because of the fact that they are still going through the many responses received for the consultation, but we will know more about that by the end of the year. So, all we can confirm at the time of recording this is that the government have not abandoned GRA reform simply because they aren't sure if they're going to reform it or not. I suspect a large amount of this is also to do with a couple of other things that are going on in the political sphere in the UK at the moment, specifically Brexit, which is everybody's excuse for not having done whatever it is they're supposed to be doing. So, okay, Michelle, Jackson, thoughts? Where does this leave us?
Well, I guess the thing that struck me the most about trying to get to the bottom of this is that they don't sound like they know what they're doing. Like, I would have thought that that Maria Miller, the head of the Women and Equalities Committee, would have maybe had a conversation with the Minister of Women and Equalities, Penny Mordaunt, at some point. And I don't know why she would have tweeted this out. Like, what? She was just going to scare people.
Basically.
I mean, it's good that we can confirm that that they haven't put it to bed. But that scared a lot of people. A lot of people on Twitter and all over my social media were just like, all these years worth of fighting were for nothing.
Yeah, I saw a lot of that myself. I mean, particularly considering the consultation period itself last year was so incredibly stressful.
Oh my God.
You remember that, right? Like, you know.
I was there.
Yes.
We were on this podcast just trying to keep it together, just like, it's all gone so wrong.
Yes. Trying and failing to keep it together sometimes. So,
yeah.
Definitely me. So, yes, this was just incredibly confusing. But at the same time, do you think, is she right? Is Maria Miller right? Was that a mistake to focus on the reform of that piece of legislation rather than something else?
I guess my only kind of comment on this situation is it doesn't have to be either or. It can be both and, surely. You know, there are aspects of the GRA reform which, you know, trans people really want to see. But also, obviously, change within the NHS in particular is a desperate issue and something that needs attention. So I think it was a weird thing to say that kind of looking at the GRA reform was a mistake, because surely it's not a case of one or the other, but a case of both. Both of these things are important.
Very true.
Yeah, I mean, Jackson, you're totally right. We could totally, like, cover all the angles. It's not like they have one person who can work on one thing at a time. They've got a whole equalities office. They've got a whole subcommittee. They've got a whole board of ministers that could definitely start putting this into action.
I mean, they've ostensibly got an action plan, haven't they? Which was sort of released with great fanfare at the same time as the consultation was started last July. So, you know, there is...
Yeah, I was covering that when I was doing the journalism thing, like, full time, like, when all that was happening. And I felt so much hope for the future. But then I heard someone, but then I talked to someone just like, they released almost the exact same plan 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And nothing happened.
Yeah. The 2011 Equality Action Plan, there was a certain amount of... similarity. But then, I mean, in that LGBT action plan on both occasions, it's like we need to do more about discrimination. And you are right, you should be doing both. But then the excuse that they'll make is, oh, well, we don't have enough resources and stuff. And it's like, okay,
well, maybe
fine.
they should stop fucking cutting them.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of where my thinking.
I'm trying to cut down on the Tory bashing with this because I know that some of our listeners are conservatives, but I've got to say, if they don't have enough resources, stop fucking cutting them.
Basically.
What are you doing?
Yeah. We've got listeners who are Tories. How have they not been switched off by now by just literally everything that we say?
I like to think because of our charming personalities.
We don't have charming personalities. We're both angry, bitter trans women.
We both know that, but they don't.
Okay, fair enough.
Stop opening the curtain on our truths.
That's right, yes. I should not draw back the veil, should I?
Okay, so should I do the next bit?
Yeah, let's move on, I think.
All right, just a very, very quick appeal, really, because in the last episode we talked a lot about the case of 3 trans women being placed in a segregated unit in a women's prison. Much of the press falsely reported that this is potentially part of a wider policy to segregate all trans women in the prison estate. But this is not true, and we found that out here at the podcast by making a phone call, which a lot of the press didn't, it would seem. But whatever, it happened. But we were told by the Ministry of Justice that this isn't the case, and that these 3 women were separated due to unique circumstances that these 3 particular trans women have. But we want to know more, and we've pretty much hit a dead end when it comes to the prison service and the Ministry of Justice, so we would like to appeal to you for information. If you are related to any of these 3 women in any way, we would love to hear your side of the story if you're able. You can contact us on our website, whatthetrans.tumblr.com/contact. And if you wish to remain anonymous, we will absolutely do that. We would need confirmation that you are who you say you are, but we want to know the truth about what is going on here. So please do get in touch, if you can.
So skipping straight on to the next thing, which is a quick little digest from over the pond, an American roundup. And first, looming large, the military ban against trans personnel has now begun. It was falsely reported to have begun back in January, but the actual ban is now here. According to a directive released on the 12th of March, potential recruits have got until the 12th of April to enlist as their gender identity, and current service members will have until then to apply for a change of recognised gender. After the 12th of April, transgender people will only be able to serve as the gender they were assigned at birth. So this has come in spite of the fact that there are still some injunctions in place that should stop a total ban of trans people in the military, but they appear to have gotten around this by making this revised trans ban that on paper claims to allow trans people to serve, but only if they don't say it out loud or seek treatment. So don't be mistaken, this is still a de facto ban. As always, we're going to link to the places that you can donate to help fight this in our description. But also, as ever, when we're talking about America, please send your love to any trans people you might know over there. This is a scary time for them, even if they are not involved with the military. All right, so what do we think about this then?
Well, I mean, it's horrific. It's horrific for any trans people who happen to be in the military, and whatever your opinion of the military is, like I know that me and Ashley share similar viewpoints on the military, and I'm pretty sure Jackson is on the same page as us. But the truth of the matter is, in America, the military was a place where trans people could go and get employment.
Mm-hmm.
Admittedly, not very good employment, but they could get employment. And for a few years at least, you could go and serve openly and expect to be treated with some level of dignity, maybe, hopefully. But that is about to change, and there is a lot of trans people in the military for that reason, who maybe would have joined up to seek healthcare they couldn't get anywhere else, which is dark in itself, but yeah, there's a lot of trans people that are going to be affected by this.
I know. And it's, you want to support those trans people, but at the same time, it's like if we're talking about the problems that trans people face, like, I just don't like the military-focused nature of this, because you get that here in the UK as well, with people talking about, like, oh, trans service members in the military. And it's like, I am way too much of a anarcho-commie, pacifist, hippie, whatever I am, to actually particularly want to support a load of people with guns. I don't think... I kind of think we want to work towards a world where politics is not conducted at the end of a barrel, in a lot of cases. However, I recognise that a lot of people are going to think, oh, well, that's unbearably naive and whatever else. It's just, I kind of wish we were being nicer to each other. So while this thing has to exist, you'd think it would employ everybody, but not while Trump and Pence are in office, because they just want to discriminate against anybody who isn't them. So this is a delight, because it's kind of like I just don't really support anything about any of the things that are taking place.
Hey guys, girls, and everyone in between. This is Michelle, cutting in from the more recent past, because as I was chopping this episode together, more news emerged regarding this trans ban bullshit that I felt needed to be added in at the last minute. So on the 19th of March, literally the day I was editing this podcast together, BuzzFeed reported that a judge has confirmed that indeed an injunction remains in place that does block the application of this proposed trans ban. Judge Colleen Kolar-Kotali from the District Court in Washington, D.C. released a decision notice when she stated defendants were incorrect in claiming that there was no longer an impediment. Defendants remain bound by this court's preliminary injunction to maintain the status quo. What does this mean? Well, as past Ashley said, the trans ban was announced to begin, but we believe that they had made enough changes to sneak around the remaining injunction, but Judge Kolar-Kotali has made it clear that this is not actually the case. Back in January, it was widely reported that the last injunction blocking the ban had been lifted, meaning that the ban could go ahead. This was not strictly true, as we reported at the time, as that last injunction, whilst having been withdrawn, was still also in place in some way. It's very complicated, and I don't quite understand it myself, but there now appears to be some confusion over whether this last injunction is still in place or not. But it appears that there is going to be some kind of showdown sooner rather than later over whether this last injunction still exists. Judge Kolar-Kotali seems to think so, but the Trump administration has other ideas. We will keep you in the loop as much as we can, and we will link to the BuzzFeed article as well as places where you can send money to help fund this, as well as places where you can send money to help fund the fights the American trans people have currently being faced with. Alright, that's enough from me. Right, back to the past. Chelsea Manning has been imprisoned again after refusing to testify to a grand jury who are investigating WikiLeaks. Chelsea released a statement on her Twitter stating, "I will not comply with this or any other grand jury. Imprisoning me for my refusal to answer questions only subjects me to additional punishment for repeatedly stated ethical objections to the grand jury system." The system she is referring to is the grand jury system in America, which operates in secrecy and acts to investigate potential criminality whilst also acting as a legal proceeding. The only two places on Earth that still have this practice is America and Liberia.
Right.
The problems that Chelsea appears to have with this system is that individuals subject to a grand jury have no right to counsel, no right to confront or cross-examine witnesses, and that witnesses who refuse to testify can be held in contempt of court, just like Chelsea has been. Chelsea could be imprisoned for the length of the grand jury investigation, which could be up to 18 months unless she decides to testify, which it doesn't sound like she will. We don't want to get into the rights and wrongs of the situation with WikiLeaks, grand juries, etc. What we do want to say on this is Chelsea Manning has made her name by standing up for her beliefs, whether you agree with her actions or not. Although it should be said that me and Ashley here at the podcast do tend to agree and support her. She is a person who is worthy of respect, and at the very least, she's one of us, and she needs our help. A Twitter account has emerged that has advice on how to help Chelsea while she is incarcerated. Head to @ResistChelsea on Twitter, and we will provide links in the descriptions on how you can help. Jackson, what's your take on all this stuff?
Wow.
I put you on the spot a little bit.
You did put me on the spot there. I don't know that I know enough about the situation to really comment.
Yeah, it is a bit complicated because, I've heard people talk about how WikiLeaks have done some pretty terrible things, and the act of defending them, which this could be read as, is not something that people should necessarily be behind. But then, like I said when I was doing the thing, she's one of us, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's all about optics, this, isn't it? And the American government, which obviously absolutely hates Chelsea Manning, for who she is and what she's done and the things that she represents are just, it could look a lot like a kind of legislative bullying sort of thing, couldn't it? I think, she's obviously sticking fast and hard to the principles that have already been established, that that's what she believes in. But this grand jury system has always seemed like a bit of a shadowy mess. And I know very little about how, what that is and how it works and so on. We're here again, free Chelsea.
Well, I've done a little bit of reading about what the grand jury system is. And as I understand it, although I'm not an American or any kind of legal expert, but as I understand it, it is basically a group of citizens come together and they sort of investigate whether a crime has happened.
I see.
And the main problems are that people who are subpoenaed to go there have to testify. They don't have access to the same rights as they do in other kinds of courts.
I see.
And it's a very shadowy process that means that I think, and I could be wrong here, they don't necessarily have the protection of the Fifth Amendment, the right to not self-incriminate.
I see.
Which is basically a situation where you can be called up to attend this thing and incriminate yourself, and if you don't, you can be locked up for the length of the grand jury session. So,
damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like a very bad thing. One of the many things that America does that are just objectively bad. I think this is, in my opinion, definitely one of them. I mean, somebody listening may know more about this than me, and I could be completely wrong, and I would be really happy to be corrected, because I kind of don't want this to be a thing, if it is a thing. But I think it's a thing.
Pretty sure.
And I think Chelsea's right.
But, more updates as we get them. And
corrections, if what I've just said is complete dog shit.
Well, that'll be a fun thing for 2 weeks' time. But, yes, anyway, so let's speed on through the last couple of bits of news, shall we? So, this is a bit of news which, while it's not directly trans-related in and of itself, it could be a bit of a canary in a coal mine moment, and in a nutshell, it is this. The UK government is seemingly trying its level best to ban internet porn. So a new plan to tackle this unholy scourge is set to come into force on the 1st of April, which seems like an appropriate date somehow, but there's just one problem with it. It's a terrible idea, and it probably won't even work. The government have taken the position that naked human bodies are the most secret thing ever and should under no circumstances be seen by anyone, but particularly not by those who are teenaged and younger. So to try to quote-unquote solve this problem, they are demanding that a verified age check of some kind take place before anybody can access any naughty content online. To be brief, they intend for this to work by verifying somebody's age through their credit card details. So yes, they want to make it so that if you pay for porn, you do so under your own name, with your own card details, regulated and overseen by the porn companies themselves, because that sort of thing always works out so well. One of the things that's worth pointing out here, though, is that the UK is currently the only country in the world who have taken steps to do this. So this means that after April the 1st, there's going to be a large section of the UK population who are Googling how a VPN works so they can access it seemingly from another country. So far, so foolish, but this has impacts in other ways. If a legal option to do something is removed, people will then seek the not-so-legal option. And that has risks like not using a secure VPN or going to websites that are loaded with malware or even extremist content. Not to mention the disruption to those who are involved in porn in the UK who may find it much, much more difficult to find hosting or any other web services as a result of the ban. So this is something to definitely keep an eye on, and we will be doing just that. But what do we think? So is there any legitimacy to this at all, or is it just another quote-unquote moral crusade from the Conservatives?
I guess I've got a few thoughts on this. So I was speaking to someone who is a teacher and who often sees on their social media feed, on the one hand, kind of parents being like, oh my God, like my kids might have access to porn, I'm so terrified of this. But also sees, on the other hand, queer people being like, essentially, porn is great, or, other variations of that, or like, here's porn that represents us, and that kind of thing. Which I thought was an interesting perspective, but my personal view around this kind of conversation around children and young people having increasing access to porn at younger and younger ages is that really what's needed is education, and rather than censorship. Really, it's surely about having conversations with young people that, hey, you might see some stuff out there, but be warned that it might not be realistic, or it might not, represent healthy dynamics. Or I just feel like so often there's a panic response when really the response should be, why don't we just teach kids about things like consent and, kind of healthy sexual relationships, rather than handing over tons and tons of information to kind of porn companies who are now going to be in charge of maintaining our security. Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It does.
It does.
Yeah.
It's like I'm sort of disconnected from this because I've never really been involved in the sex worker world. I don't really patronize porn sites myself, which I know that I'm wrong. Because I know that everyone likes porn. I don't know why it doesn't work on me. I see it and I feel awkward. It doesn't do anything for me. But
You're not wrong. Everyone's different.
I guess I'm very sex positive. If people are into porn involving shoes or, I don't know, balloons or whatever, I am so happy they found their kink. I am so genuinely happy that they found it. But at the same time, if I was into that stuff, I wouldn't want to hand over my credit card to some... Like, I've heard that you can buy a pass from a newsagent's.
Right.
Like, this just seems to be a new version of people going in and buying stuff off the top shelf.
Yeah, and it seems to be somehow making it even dodgier. And it's... like, by, pushing people onto... there's going to be a proliferation of unlicensed, unregistered, exploitative sites now, and God knows whatever content is going to be there, and it can be a little bit frustrating. But as you say, Jackson, it's like it's one of the few places, or at least currently, and it certainly was when I was a bit younger, it's one of the few places where you actually see LGBT representation, because you can go and find gay porn, you can go and find porn with trans people in it. It might not be very positive, it might in fact be openly exploitative and objectifying, but it's there, and you will see in that sense, you'll see a representation of yourself, even if she's being hideously treated in some way, which seemed to reflect all of the stuff that I stumbled across online. So, but so that not being there and kind of making it much, much more difficult, much, much more dangerous to actually access that kind of content, which is for so many people quite validating, is not good. It's not a good look, and it's like, as it's a knee-jerk reaction entirely. Like, well, this porn is bad. And it's interesting that it's, obviously it's the government that's driving this, the UK government, the Conservatives specifically, because you just know that half of them are pouring themselves a hand shandy when they get home, because they've only just about learned how to use a laptop, specifically with the intent of what, getting themselves some frisk. And again, we're bashing the Tories. I say we, I mean I, and I stand by it. I do. I regret nothing.
Sometimes we just have to, because like a few years back, they banned things like face-sitting in pornography.
Yes.
And stuff, which is like, it tended to focus more on, like, female bodies. Pleasure seemed to be the target.
Yeah, and so that, so you can't see squirting now, right? So that...
Yeah, things like that.
So women are not allowed to have fun in porn. It's like, oh, okay, that's the message, and officially it limits, from the government.
It limits the amount of porn that can be made about trans guys too. Like, it's a wide... their social crusade against this stuff has pretty alarming consequences, especially with trans people who are sex workers.
Yes, exactly. So I think we should ramble on, in fact, because there's only so much you can say about porn without it just degrading into some kind of conversation or other. So, yes. Let's just skip over that bit and get to the final little news story, yes?
Yeah, we will be following the implications of this porn ban as they develop. If any of you out there are in the sex worker community or have ties to it, we'd love to hear from you to see if this does have any impact on their livelihoods. Don't worry, very sex positive, very sex worker positive podcast. We will keep your details anonymous if you so wish. You can get us at the contact page on our website. But anyway, overall, as it usually is, it's been a stressful couple of weeks for the trans community. But as ever, there's something hopeful too, just in time for the end of this terrible news segment. Over the last few days, a man named Anthony Watson, who is a member of the board of directors for GLAAD and a patron of diversity role models here in the UK, started an open letter encouraging gay men to stand in solidarity with the trans community. Like L with the T before it, this has taken off in a big way, with, at the time of recording, just over 860 names having signed the open letter, to be found on the website gwitht.com. We here at the podcast are always up for some solidarity, and this was a delight to see. So tell your friends to get involved and add their names to the letter, gwitht.com. And click on the Add My Name to support your trans siblings and tell all your friends to do the same. And I was reading through the list of names. You got Peter Mandelson, who, whatever. You got George Takei signing it. You got some pretty big names signing this. So yeah, if you're listening and you want to be put in that kind of company, get your signature down.
Do the thing.
So what do you think? This is good stuff, right?
It is, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to make a slightly snarky comment about Peter Mandelson, but it's all right. It can wait.
I was just going to say I absolutely love this initiative. I think it's so important. Obviously, as a trans man who is bisexual, it kind of means something kind of special to me as well. But also, I'm quite excited for there to be a third wave of this. I think that a B with the T might be en route soon too, so maybe something else to watch out for.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I retweeted somebody trying to start the B with the T on the What the Trans Twitter, and I got a fair few retweets and responses. So that may be oncoming.
Yes, yeah.
That may be cooking right now on Twitter.
The oncoming storm. Sorry, I'm just Doctor Who referencing everything because I can, essentially. But yeah, you're right. This was super to see, wasn't it? Because again, it was like the sort of H-Bomber Guy stream and a couple of other bits of good news that we've talked about, in that it was like that came along and there wasn't a build-up to it. It just sort of happened and it was there. And it's like, oh wow, that's really nice, and it was kind of as a nice antidote to a lot of the negative coverage that we see constantly. It's like, oh good, not everybody hates us, and it's nice to be reminded of that. So
yeah, especially with, I have noticed in the world of the social medias, as I'm sort of moderating our social media output, there's been a fair few prominent gay men who have definitely come up and said that trans people are full of it. I can't remember his name, James Dreyfus, the actor. He sort of came out as a big old turfy nightmare. There's Johnny Best, who was part of LGBT Up North, who has basically started petitions about how Stonewall should drop the T, and he's a garbage person. Is that going to be libel? No, it's slander, isn't it, if it's spoken out loud? Well, fuck it. He's a garbage person. Yeah. I'll go to court and say that. Yeah. But yeah, there's been a fair few prominent gay men that have come out against particularly trans women. Yeah. It seems to be the turf line that they sort of ignore trans men and non-binary people. I don't know. Well, I know why that is.
Yeah, you know exactly why that is.
Theories as to why that is. But yeah, so this is good to see because, when I discovered TERFs and stuff, and this isn't necessarily something that I'm particularly comfortable with admitting, but it's there, I was terrified for a while of lesbians.
Well, I mean...
And I didn't know what to do. It was definitely something where I would be around lesbians and just be like...
Am I safe?
This could go either way. And that's, of course, not true, because the vast majority of lesbians are totally cool with trans women, And I was kind of developing the same sort of thing about gay men, just are these going to be the good ones, or are these going to be the bad ones? So seeing this, it's definitely something.
It is.
I mean, was that a bad take on my part? Am I full of shit with admitting that?
No. Actually,
no, I think it's quite a fair reaction to have when...
Seconded.
There is certainly so much discourse that you're subjected to as a trans person that does kind of, certainly I guess as trans women, this idea that it's a threat to lesbians and stuff like that. So I think that's a perfectly legitimate
I agree.
reaction that you had.
I exclusively like dudes. Leave me alone.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Which is honestly the fact that there are people who still are attracted to dudes. It's clearly sexual orientation is not a choice.
I think most trans women do exclusively like dudes. It's not quite as much with the percentage of cis people who who like dudes or women or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's a slightly higher proportion of LGB trans people.
Oh, yes.
Not by much. Like, in my life, I think 70% of the trans people I've met have been straight.
Well, I mean...
Do you know, that's... Sorry.
I was just going to say, you should come to Manchester, where I can't think of anybody who is. So...
Wait, am I the only one you know who's straight? I feel kind of honoured that you let me in your coven.
I definitely saw a statistic recently that was saying that around just over 60% of trans men are bisexual.
Okay.
Oh.
So yes, and to be honest, that does align with the trans men that I've met. Very few of them are kind of straight.
Yeah, and I would say actually that the majority of trans people, and specifically trans women that I know, would describe themselves as bi, but again, we sort of feel like we get our fingers burnt if we would openly say, oh, well, I'm a lesbian, because then we kind of think that there's going to be people jumping down your throat to say, well, you're not a real lesbian because you're two trans women dating. Because obviously two trans women dating each other is obviously, you know, a TERF's going to look at that and think, well, gosh, obviously I'm a victim here in some way. Anyway.
You know, that's totally a thing that I've never really had to face, because, like, people expect me to like guys, so I sort of line it up with their expectations. It's not something I've ever had to think about. God, that's gotta fucking suck.
Well, this is why I just say bi, really, because it's just much easier and whatever else. But I think I do think we should move on. As delighted as I am to talk about myself at length, I think we should talk about other things. Because we have a jolly little community announcement, don't we? This is a new project that we have seen. A new podcast specifically looking at trans identity in Manila in the Philippines. Okay, so there is podcast Privacy International, so you can find the website privacyinternational.org. And this is an ongoing series, and so in the first episode of the Gender and Privacy series, the podcast presenters go over to Manila in the Philippines to meet two trans people, Naomi Fontanos and A.R. Arcon, and who will talking around the Filipino government's intention to deploy an ID card system and the implications that will have on privacy, and particularly on the trans community. Haven't had a chance to listen to this podcast yet, but I definitely am going to. But yes, this sort of popped up on the radar this week, so we thought we'd give it a bit of a signal boost. Privacyinternational.org. Yes. And we'll pop a link straight to the website and the podcast episode in our description, as we so often do.
I'd also like to quickly chime in and remind everyone that Pose is coming to BBC Two. I think it's at 9 o'clock on the 21st of March, and after that it will be on iPlayer. Go watch it, because in my circle, at the very least, I'm the only person who knows what it is. But I was talking to Jackson, and Jackson knows what it is.
Woo!
Jackson is the first other person I've met who knows what Pose is.
Wonderful.
Of course.
So yeah, go check that out when it's on. I will be live tweeting when it's on. So come and sit on Twitter with me and, you know, do the outreach thing that I read about on a marketing website.
Well, so, I mean, you know, I think there's certainly been a couple of accusations of kind of flogging a certain horse too much. We talk about Pose a lot. I say we, I mean Michelle.
Not enough. It's the best TV show that I've ever seen.
Yes, which is a statement.
I don't know if that's because I was starved of trans content for most of my life, or whether it is actually better than The Wire. We'll see.
We'll see
when everyone finally gets a chance to watch it.
We certainly will. And if you'd just let me finish up here. Yes, so obviously we've talked about it quite a lot, but I've got to tell you, listeners, I have in fact now seen the first episode of Pose, and it is just as good as everybody says it is. So I'm surprised, because normally I'm not going to watch that, but I watched it, and of course it's brilliant, and of course you should watch it. So from Thursday 21st onwards, Pose is on the BBC. It'll be on iPlayer afterwards. Let's all watch it and get depressed, but also really feel quite empowered.
And just very quickly, like, I was walking up after meeting Jackson, just being like, "Oh, have you heard of Pose?" And he was just like, "Of course I have." And I'm like, "Well, you're the first one I've met." So, how long have you known about Pose? And is it out there? Am I just in like my own shitty bubble of cis people?
I'll tell you what it is. I am both queer and black. and which means that I live at a unique intersection on Twitter where I get the best of not only queer Twitter and the best of black Twitter, but the best of queer black Twitter.
Nice.
And it's been all over my timeline for at least a year. It's been, because Poser's been around for a while now.
Yeah, it came out like pretty much it was out when we started this podcast, because I remember talking about this in episode 1 after I got a bunch of the episodes from a friend of mine who works in post-production stuff. So it's definitely been around for a very long time.
Yes,
at least since then.
Our first episode was last June, wasn't it? So, but finally, it's now on the BBC, and finally, it's far more widely available than having a friend who works in the right place, or doing clever torrenty things that I don't even know how they work. So now that's us done with the news. So we're going to move on to the meat of the episode, I think. So you've probably noticed, if you're reasonably observant, that we have a guest along with us for this jolly little ride. So hello once again, Jackson. Hope you haven't found the experience too crazy and alienating thus far.
It's been delightful. It's been a delight to watch the two experts in action.
Experts. Like, if people seem to think that we are a professional setup, I think we've done our job, but I should say that I've had to move almost all my worldly possessions onto my bed to make room for Jackson in my studio / bedroom. This room is a state now. I need to tidy it up. But yes, we are a professional outfit, I promise.
Absolutely. But for the next part of this episode, we are going to be just talking to Jackson, because there are certain things that Michelle and I are able to talk about and are able to give opinions on, and there are certain things that it just doesn't feel right for us to do that. But what we also wanted to do, because Michelle and I are both trans women, both trans feminine, and we're both of really the same generation. So we wanted to, as much as we can, we want to talk to people that do not embody that, because we keep saying there are so many different ways of being trans, but realistically, there's a very similar experience from both myself and Michelle. So, with that in mind, over the next few months and over the run of the podcast going forward, we're going to be sampling as many different voices as we can, starting off with the delightful Mr. Jackson King. Welcome on board once again. Would you, just to start us all off, care to just, I guess, introduce yourself? Tell us a little about yourself.
Ooh, well, thank you for having me. I guess I'm just a baby trans boy. That's how I like to think about it. At the moment, I am sort of newly out to myself and to the world. As of January, actually, right. So very, very recent and fresh, and lots of sort of steep learning curves, shall we say, throughout my journey. So over the last couple of months. But yeah, I am also black. I am bisexual. I like to describe myself as chunky yet funky.
Nice.
So, so yeah, basically a black bisexual plus size trans man, and yeah, I guess I've kind of been knocking around in the LGBT community only since 2016, really, which is when I first came out as bisexual. I kind of had a delayed coming out process, in part due to a religious upbringing, which meant, I guess, repressing some parts of myself. So really, over the last few years, it's been about coming home to myself, really. And coming out as trans has been part of that too.
How familiar were you with trans issues before you came out? Like, is it something that you've kept an eye on for years, or is it something that you're sort of entering into fresh?
Ooh, almost. Do you mean as in since I came out in January, or sort of before that?
From before, did you follow trans issues before you came out, or is it something that you've just it's sort of the dam has broken and you're sort of just emerged on the stage, not necessarily knowing what the stage looks like, if you know what I mean?
I think a mix of both in a way. So I think a key part to my story is coming out as bisexual, because that actually happened within a community. So I mentioned my religious upbringing. So I grew up Christian, and I still am Christian. But I've since 2016 been immersed in Christian LGBT community, and it was as the result of kind of being around other trans people that I suppose I started to have a framework for my own gender feelings over the years, and to kind of have a language and a vocabulary, really, to explain what was going on for me, but also to have the option, to know that it was an option. So I think a lot of people have commented on the fact that there's like a hyper visibility of trans women and trans feminine people,
Yep.
but a kind of invisibility of trans masculine people and trans men. And so in some ways it was kind of like realizing that actually this could be a thing. Like I could really be a man. Like that's a possibility. Which of course, like once you come out to yourself, you then kind of look back over your story and you see some of these signs and these telltale moments. And I guess for me, while there were some signs there, the idea that I could actually be a trans man just wasn't even on my radar.
I can totally get with that. Like, because when I was 5 years old in 1990, I knew something was up, but I didn't have the words. I mean, I was 5, so I only knew maybe 30 words anyway, but none of those were cis, trans, or anything like that. And when I came out, I very much didn't know anything. I just came out and was like, I don't even know what this means. I guess, does that make me a transsexual? Am I a transvestite? What word is it? So I kind of... But then, once I came out and sort of connected, finding, like, trans women was never a problem.
Yeah.
Like, in the media. Like, they were bad representations in the media, but there was nothing... There was no just absence of trans people that I could look to and be like, oh, so it is a thing. So that's a big difference between our experiences right there, I think.
But then, just listening to you talk just then, Jackson, one thing that struck me as similar was the kind of the retrospective that you then, I guess, impose onto the rest of your life. And it's like, as you say, the telltale moments where it's like, oh man, it must have been so obvious back then, or whatever, you know. And so that's something that's, I do think that is congruent to many, many different trans experiences, you know, trans masculine and trans feminine. And I think one thing that a lot of people, trans masc, trans femme and non-binary, will come up against is this idea of being trans enough and what that exactly consists of. And so is that something that you've encountered yourself, that kind of mindset of you have to demonstrate how trans you are before you'll be accepted, or to that extent?
Absolutely. I think a lot of that struggle around being trans enough really has been in my own head. So to kind of tell a little bit more about my story, I guess over the last year in particular, I definitely knew there was definitely something up with gender. But because I didn't feel like I aligned with the trans narrative, and I think we all know the trans narrative, which is that all trans people have always known since they were a kid, that they've always hated their body or felt trapped in their body, and that all trans people experience this kind of horrific dysphoria. I didn't connect with that story that I'd seen both in the media and actually from some of the trans people who were my friends too. So I actually felt very selfish and indulgent to be thinking about gender and whether I might be trans. I actually questioned whether it was me just trying to do something to be cool or to fit in. You know, you have all of these like really ridiculous ideas when you think about it. But I really struggled with the idea that I'm not really trans, because my story doesn't look like other people's stories. But there were some things that really helped me to unpack that. I kind of went on a bit of an internet search, which tends to be the way that I deal with things. I remember when I was trying to work out whether I was bisexual, I spent a lot of time Googling, am I bisexual? Because obviously Google has the answers to those kinds of things.
They do say that Google and Facebook know that you are LGBT way before you do sometimes.
It's true. But so I think with what you're talking about and kind of the pressures and the feeling dysphoria versus not feeling dysphoria and so on, it's interesting because personally I know that a lot of the problems that I had in that area, and this may be the same for you, it may not, stemmed from things that I had internalized. So stuff that I'd heard about trans people and about trans women, particularly, all my life, that I'd taken on board and thought, oh, well, that's true. That must be true because I've been hearing people saying it for years. And so you internalize so much of that, and then you think, well, no, I can't be this, that, and the other because this thing that I've internalized and been holding on to for so many years is telling me that I'm not. And actually, that can make the whole process so much more difficult, particularly if when you're internalizing messages that might not be very helpful from the trans community itself. And that's where the trans enough thing comes into it, I think, because a lot of the older trans women that I first met when I first came out definitely had the mindset of yes, the trans experience, and you will go for surgery and you will probably have breast augmentation. And it's like, wow, you guys are making a lot of assumptions about me and we've literally only just met. I don't think that's a helpful way to support any community, frankly.
Yeah, precisely. And I think, so when I was first exploring my gender identity, I was like, well, I don't hate my chest right now or other body parts, and in some ways I sort of actually liked them, and I also didn't feel like it would be impossible for me to live the rest of my life as a woman. So I really struggled with that because I was like, well, I'm not fitting into this story that I've been told, and therefore I don't deserve to claim the trans label. I don't deserve to look at transition, whether social or medical, because it's not this act of kind of desperation, which seems to be how a lot of, I guess, cis people perhaps make peace with trans people, is the idea that, well, they had to, otherwise, they would have really struggled with their mental health or so on and so forth. Like it's kind of really centered on suffering, isn't it? Rather than
definitely
than joy. And so I guess I
was just going to say it's about dysphoria rather than euphoria, which,
precisely.
When you have gender euphoria, it's like, okay, no, so I'm presenting this way and it's working and I feel great and this is how it should have been in the first place. And, we don't talk about that enough. We spend a lot of time talking about dysphoria as trans people and trying to explain that to cis people, but then we don't actually talk about how good it feels when we're doing it right, which is interesting.
Yes, exactly. And I think that for me, kind of this emphasis on gender euphoria was really my guiding light throughout my my journey of realization, let's call it. So I actually watched a YouTube video that spoke about gender dysphoria versus gender euphoria. And so there are two trans people talking in the video, and this trans guy was saying that actually, once he'd experienced gender euphoria, it was like suddenly he then realised that he'd been living under gender dysphoria his whole life, but hadn't recognised it as such because it'd almost become a sort of background noise, like it was just what life was. And that's certainly been my experience, that once I've had these moments of gender euphoria, then trying to put myself back in the box of womanhood has then started to feel really uncomfortable. And actually, it hasn't been until I've experienced gender euphoria that I've then begun to understand and actually start to experience gender dysphoria, which, having spoken to some trans people, can be another kind of common experience.
Yeah, that's sort of similar to what happened to me. I mean, I definitely had some dysphoria, but most of the time it wasn't like, oh my god, if I don't get this sorted out, I'm going to die. I did feel very depressed in the before times, but they weren't automatically related, and a lot of that lifted once I transitioned. So I definitely had that gender euphoria moment. But then in my experience, when it came to the mental health stuff, like I've said before, I sort of traded in that kind of thing for a whole bunch of other stuff that came at me. But yeah, that's totally something that I can relate to, and something that I don't think is talked about enough.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So how has it been in terms of, because Michelle and I have made mention, it's kind of super easy to find trans women and representations of trans women. Fine, they might not be very good, but it's out there. So how is kind of, as a as you say, a newly out baby tran, how has it been kind of finding other trans masculine people and seeing that representation? What's that sort of cultural, what's that like? Basically, I can't find a better way of phrasing the question.
It's a mixed bag. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. So I recall when it was first dawning on me that I was transmasculine, there was a real sense of fear. Fear about not finding acceptance within the transmasculine community. And so I had an idea of what the transmasculine community was like to a degree, because my partner, one of my previous partners was a trans man, and I'd seen through his experiences that it was and is very white, and that there can be, unfortunately, a kind of brand of toxic masculinity that I think some trans men embrace as a way of trying to assert their gender identity, which is a shame.
Nice.
But also other things like a real kind of strong gym bro culture.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, do a very simple test. You know, do hashtag FTM or hashtag transman on Instagram, and how many pictures are of a topless white guy with a six pack? Like, you know, that is very much the image of sort of trans masculinity. So I felt really concerned when I began to realise that I was probably a trans man. I was like, oh my god, where do I fit into this?
Oh god, do I need to go get a gym membership? Oh god, I'm hearing all this shit about Duncan Bannatyne and David Lloyd. I'm fucked.
Exactly, and I think you know, before coming out as trans, I'd worked quite hard on trying to accept my body. So, as I hinted earlier, I am a plus-sized person, and so when I thought I was a woman, I worked very hard to accept my body as bigger and curvier, and to be very careful actually about the imagery that I expose myself to. So I very deliberately followed a lot of fat positive black women on Instagram, because, well, I kind of, as a baby bisexual, I initially filled my feed with lots of skinny white queer women, and then started to feel depressed and wondered why. So that was
relate.
Yeah. So that changed quickly. But so I'd really worked on like accepting my body as a curvy black woman in inverted commas. So then to realise that I was a curvy black man was like, oh my god, okay, I kind of need to press refresh on that.
Yeah.
You know,
reload.
Yeah, exactly. You know, because I do feel like the conversation around body positivity and fat acceptance and challenging fat phobia really has been spearheaded by women and largely by Black women. There doesn't seem to be much of that conversation happening around men so much online, not that I've picked up on. So I was really concerned that this was going to be really bad for my body image and feeling okay about myself, because I was never going to be one of those sort of skinny, white, androgynous trans guys that, you know...
The beautiful ones. I think that's...
just rub it in, Michelle.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it like that. But like, there is some crossover here, because I remember when I was looking things up and seeing all these beautiful trans women who are all white, skinny, and you know, they were clearly in a position where they could get relatively easy access to the work that they would want. And I'm there, also also a plus size person, just like, that's not going to happen for me anytime soon, and making peace with that.
Yeah.
And then with all the other body issues that can sometimes come with being trans and the dysphoria that can emerge where you least expect it, it can be a bit of a shit show.
Absolutely. Exactly. And I mean, especially when you throw in the idea of curves and manhood, and like being trans, you know, often you don't really talk about curvy men, do you? You talk about curvy women. And so that was again something that I guess kind of fed into this this concern that I had of really not seeing anyone that looked like me or had my experience. So I guess what I've had to do is to work really hard at hunting down trans men of colour in the most loving way.
Of course.
Have you been successful in your hunts?
I
hope you didn't hurt anyone.
Yeah, put the crossbow away, Jack.
Yeah, I've been very, very aggressive in my hunting of trans men of colour and fat and plus-sized trans men online. But also, I've just because there's not loads of us, I've also had to look to cis plus-sized men as another way of kind of reframing my understanding of what men can look like and the shapes that they can take, and looking at plus-sized male models who aren't trans but who I can say, do you know what, my body shape looks like theirs, and I can, you know,
you can relate,
precisely.
Yeah, I've been doing that with like an area of dysphoria for me that's in a big way is usually my hairline, but then people tell me it's not that bad. And then, so I keep looking at like cis women's hairline, just being like, does it match up with theirs? Does it match up with theirs?
Yes.
So I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Men with hips, I'm always like, that man has hips, okay? That man has hips.
I'm not sure if it's a particularly healthy thing or not, but it does make me feel better sometimes. So I guess it kind of...
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, it's... Oh man, there's so many commonalities as well as it being a different experience, though. But I think it would be remiss of us to not directly confront one of the, I guess, differences here. So, obviously, as a trans man of color, so the kind of intersections of kind of racism in the LGBT community, is that something that you've encountered yourself, even before or since coming out as trans?
Ooh, that is a big question. So I think that my experience of racism within the LGBT community has been so far not as overtly and outrageously horrific as that of others. So before I came out as trans, and when I was kind of trying to be on the scene as a black bisexual woman, I guess the sense of racism that I experienced was really around like the politics of desire, and definitely noticing that my white peers were having success in dating, romance, flirting that I certainly wasn't having among queer women. And I found that a really interesting thing because a lot of the conversation around racism in the LGBT community tends to focus on some of those Grindr profiles out there that say, no blacks, no Asians, all of we can list it all off. So that conversation doesn't really happen around queer women at all. But when I got talking to other queer women of colour, they also had similar experiences. And it's there's just like a sort of silent, very subtle, I guess, exclusion of you as a person of colour from being viewed as desirable. So
like
that
a hierarchy of attractiveness or something, isn't it?
Absolutely,
which is ridiculous.
It is. But we live under white supremacy, and we live under white ideals of beauty, and the idea that anything that's European is superior, and that influences our desires. Whether people want to acknowledge that or not, it is political, and the idea that you could have a racial preference is not that's not something that's disconnected from the fact that we live under white supremacy. It's very much tied up. That.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
When I was first, because I grew up in a town full of white people. There was 5 people of colour in the whole town up north. So I sort of got all of the white supremacist stuff growing up. It was only when I moved to London and one of my friends told me to Google beautiful, and I went on the image search and everyone was white. And at first I didn't realise how strange that was until they said, where are the people of colour? I was like, oh shit. And that was a big moment for me. And I guess I'm saying this because, for people listening, you can have a privilege and not have no fucking idea for years, like I did. And I'm still learning, and I probably still don't know anywhere nearly enough about this stuff, but you listening out there, white people, you could be like me. It can happen to you, even if you think you're, the most woke, anti-racist person in the world. You could be walking around with all this toxic bullshit and have no idea how toxic it is. I'm sorry, I didn't want to cross-talk you, but that was just something that, for something you said about not being able, there's certain standards of beauty. That just seemed to, that was when I realised how true that was.
Yeah. It so is. It's and ridiculously so.
Yeah,
it's interesting that it's been so insidious, and obviously, while I'm actually quite glad to hear that you haven't experienced anything directly in that sense, obviously, because those occasions are absolutely horrible. But I'm kind of interested to hear an experience of just how kind of stark that is. That kind of, as you say, friends finding success and you not doing so, and kind of wondering, well, what is that about exactly?
Absolutely. You internalize that, and that's very much what I did for my first year of being out as bisexual. Was there's something wrong with me? I'm not desirable. I'm not this. I'm not that. Yeah, you absolutely. It begins to kind of eat away at your confidence, your self-esteem. Yeah.
But which I guess, it's definitely why it's important to have other, role models and other people that you can talk to, aspire to be, and so on. And so, I know you've mentioned that there's not a fantastic number of kind of well-known trans men of colour as there might be for well-known white trans women, for example. But I think there have been a few instances relatively recently of kind of something like that being given a spotlight. Because I know, Jackson, you flagged to us there was a Gay Times article quite recently So it was from the Amplify series on Gay Times, and it was called Brotherhood, a conversation about what it means to be a trans man of colour in the UK. So it's quite a long article. I don't want to quote from it too extensively, but actually our listeners, if you're particularly interested, article definitely is well worth reading. It provides a lot of insight that I don't think me or Michelle would have thought of, simply because of where we come from and our positioning on this thing.
Yeah, if it hasn't been made clear already, me and Ashley are white as fuck.
So white.
so white. Like, yeah.
Like, I can't... No, I'm not even going to talk about all the boring food that I like. But the point is that... I don't know. Anyway, Gay Times, that Gay Times article, it's called Brotherhood. For me, I found it very illuminating. Is that something... have you been successful in kind of assembling that community around yourself? Are you finding it, not easy to find other trans men of colour, but is there...
Yeah.
It's out there.
It is definitely out there. So some of the ways that I've connected have been through a Facebook group, which is for trans people of colour in the UK. And through that Facebook group, I was then connected to a WhatsApp group. Yeah.
Well, that's where it really goes down, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It feels very sort of like DIY underground. But yeah, there is a WhatsApp group of trans men of colour, specifically in the UK. So if anyone out there, it does happen to be listening, who wants to be put in touch with that community, then if you get in touch with the podcast.
Yeah, we could put links in the description to anything you want.
Yeah.
Perfect.
We'll pass that on as well, because this kind of community building, as you say, it feels kind of DIY and underground, and it's really, really, really annoying that still has to be the case, where we're sort of communicating with each other, discreetly through kind of leaks and whispers sort of thing, rather than having like a vibrant, open social scene that we can all participate in without any kind of fear of discrimination or whatever. But the fact is, that kind of community building is so important, and so we'd be happy to connect anybody who needs that support to that group, because as you've made quite clear, Jackson, it's just not something that there's a tremendous amount of, and it needs to be there so much.
Yeah, it is. It's so necessary. I think there are... number one, it just means the world to see someone who has a similar experience to you. Like, that in and of itself is really comforting. But I think that when you start to have multiple intersecting identities, such as being both black and trans, it's really important to connect with people who understand what that brings with it. I think the article in the Gay Times around the Brotherhood is such a crucial piece of representation. Again, just to show that there are trans people of colour out there, and we are living vibrant lives and doing our thing. But also, one thing that I've been reflecting on a lot is black masculinity.
Oh, yeah.
And how that's different to, I guess, what I've been used to, which is black femininity, and how both of those two different things come with their own challenges. And I guess what I've been bracing myself for as I kind of continue this process of transition is, what is life going to be like for me as a black man? So I've gotten much more hyper aware and felt much more anxious around police. So I've never been stopped and searched in my life, which I think is quite a rare thing for a lot of black people anyway. But I'm anticipating that that's going to change once I have a beard, or once I'm kind of passing. I'm anticipating that kind of thing is going to change, and I will be perceived, because of how the media represents black men in particular, that I will be perceived as a threat or a criminal or things like that. there's just so many ways in which being both black and a trans man brings with it layers that I don't think white trans men would have to anticipate or have to consider.
I mean, speaking from my experience, I have felt safer contacting the police compared to a lot of my, my black friends and stuff. There was a time when I was chased in the streets, and I naturally called the police. When talking to some people, they were like, "What? That's an option for you? They'll just make it worse." And that's again another time when I realised the privilege I have, because police were an option for me, but that may not be the case for a lot of people.
Precisely, and I think that's the thing with privilege, is that privilege, the way that it functions is you don't realise you have it, because everything just kind of works, and everything kind of just works because it is designed to work for you, and so it kind of takes a lot.
It's been set up with you in mind.
Yeah, almost.
I laugh how that works. I laugh, but this is fucking horrific.
It is.
It's infuriating.
It is. It is very scary, and there are so many things that could be said around portrayals of black masculinity in particular, and how often black men are viewed in this really weird hypersexualized way, and how the narrative of the kind of hypersexualized black man and the innocent white woman, that kind of popular story that is kind of retold in many different ways in our society. I'm very concerned about how the ways in which I'm going to have to navigate lots of different situations in the future in order to keep myself safe, essentially, from white supremacy as a black man, as opposed to a black woman, where the things that you face are as horrific but different. So it's a new set of challenges to adjust to.
I guess the question I want to ask is, I think the vast majority of our listeners are white. And like I keep saying, me and Ashley are so white. How can we help? What can we do to help fight this abhorrent situation?
Oh, okay. So, first of all, I would say educate yourself. And that's an active thing. That means taking the time to either buy books that have been written by people of colour on racism or black feminism, or if you can't buy books, then follow black people on social media, listen to the conversations that they're having, and learn, and do so without interrupting and trying to throw in your 2 cents. Just observe and listen. I think that there's so much that you can pick up just by taking a long, hard look at actually who are most of the people that you follow. What is their race? Because you will be getting a particular perspective from whoever your kind of influences are. So that's really important. The other thing I'd say is be teachable. So be open to your friend who is black saying to you, hey, when you said that thing or did that thing, that was racist. When that happens, which it will, because none of us are perfect, and that's fine. When that happens, just say, okay, I've taken that on board, I'm really sorry, and I'm going to do better. I think that is a really important thing for white allies, is to be teachable. I've lost some friends because I tried to have that conversation with them, because I wanted to save the friendship rather than just kind of slowly ghost them out of my life for being racist. And, the response that I got showed me that they weren't really willing to do the work of anti-racism. and therefore, my value as a black person in their life clearly wasn't that high. So I think be teachable, be open to correction, take it on board without being defensive. And I guess the other thing that I would say is something that a absolute hero of mine called Patrice Cullors said. So she is one of the 3 black women who started the movement Black Lives Matter. And I went to an event where she was speaking, and this question was asked, like, what can white people do? And she said, the thing about challenging white supremacy is that what you're really asking white people to do is to give away power. Yeah. Not everyone wants to do that. But when you think about it, that's what you're asking, is for white people to give away power that the system has handed them, and to give that to people of colour. And I think that is a great way of realising the magnitude and the importance of this, that it's about a system where we are truly equal. And for that to happen, power has to be given away, and that's a serious thing to do.
That could be quite a painful thing.
Exactly, yeah, and a painful thing to do, importantly, yeah.
Have you read the essay about white fragility, by any chance?
No, but I have encountered enough white fragility to last me a lifetime.
This is the main difference. I'm talking from a purely academic standpoint. You're talking from the real world.
Yeah.
That definitely opened my eyes to what you were talking about. And also, I'll put links to these because they really helped me understand some of these things better. Again, I'm no expert because, again, I'm white as fuck. But the videos of Jay Smooth on YouTube, do you know him?
I don't.
He did 2 videos which changed the way I viewed race forever. The first one was just a simple vlog from like 10 years ago, where he basically made the point that a good way to talk about race is to avoid calling someone racist, but saying that they did something racist. So instead of, there may be some problematic areas with that, but it definitely helped me sort of talk to people being like, that was a thing you did that was racist. And that, the idea was that was supposed to be more of a gentle thing. But in the second video, he came out and said, yeah, that didn't work.
Yeah.
But the way he views racism is that it is something that people in privilege have in the same way that people with teeth have to constantly monitor the cleanliness of their teeth. Absolutely. So you don't go up to someone and say, you've got some broccoli in your teeth, therefore you're a disgusting human. And then the person would just be all like, how dare you? I don't have broccoli in my teeth. How dare you? My personality is wonderful. Where he said that white people should see it as like, oh, I've got some broccoli in my teeth. Sorry about that.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll learn to brush harder next time. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
What he means?
Yeah. I think it's a case of, I think maybe the thing to take away from that analogy is that a bit like brushing your teeth, which you've got to do regularly, being anti-racist is an active thing. It's an ongoing thing. There is always more to learn, because you're never going to know it all. And so I think there does need to be like a real vigilance around that. One of the things one of the things that I've heard said is that allyship is a verb. It's not a noun. It's about doing rather than claiming it as an identity.
I like that.
Hence why the A in LGBTQIA is not ally.
Yeah.
Just to be
no,
clear.
it is not. Yeah,
people
absolutely.
keep trying. Straight people keep trying to put themselves in there.
Absolutely.
They do. Give me a cookie. I support you. Give me a cookie.
Exactly. But, the same thing does happen with white people around race. And so one thing that I've noticed in my conversations with white people around race is that often they hate being called racist more than they hate actual racism.
I've seen that comparison made. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that often describes the kind of defensiveness, the flare up that you see with a lot of white fragility in these conversations.
I think everyone listening will have some kind of story in their life where somebody's called them out on something racist they did, and their reaction was absolute horror, because to a lot of people, racism is Nazis. It's the far right. It's goose stepping, where, like, the reality of it, I'd imagine, could be all sort of almost mundane sometimes.
It's far more insidious.
Absolutely. It is mundane, but deadly in those mundane ways. Because it is this, it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's these kind of small things which end up affecting kind of government policies, lack of economic resources, how people are treated in the justice system. You know, these things that happen on a smaller scale have a real impact on a macro level as well. It's not just people marching, with a swastika. There are so many other ways in which racism really does genuine harm to the lives of people of colour. And actually, on that note, I think a really good book to read, if anyone hasn't read it, which I'd be surprised by because it's done pretty well, but it's called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race.
Oh, that's the guy who wrote the white fragility thing I wrote. I've not read the book, but he wrote the same thing. I think that's where it came from.
That was a black woman that wrote that one, so...
When you were talking before about not interrupting and stuff, this is a teachable moment, everyone. This is a teachable moment. I apologise. Do continue.
That was wonderful.
But yeah, so the author is a black woman called Reni Eddo-Lodge. That's Reni, and then Eddo, Eddo, Lodge, Lodge. And she is a historian, and she talks specifically about Black history and racism in the UK. Because again, another thing that white Brits like to do is be like, "Oh, it's an American problem. We don't have that over here. It's just class." No. There is definitely a race issue over here with strong historical roots. So I heavily recommend reading that book.
Excellent. It is on my list. A lot of people where I work have read it, because where I work is an unbelievably middle-class environment. It's an arts festival. And so all of the white girls from Chorlton are desperately reading Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, just to sort of, make sure we're not getting it wrong. Essentially, that sounded very, very cynical of me, but it's on my list. I do want to read it. Several people have recommended it to me. And I think some of our listeners are probably going to have listened to your experience and thought, well, the whole fragility thing is something that can come up in specifically and exclusively LGBT terms as well, where you can say, someone makes a homophobic joke and then they get called out, that's homophobic. I'm not being homophobic. You know me. I've got loads of gay friends, blah, blah, blah. And then, sort of another level of zooming in on that is that happens in the LGBT community itself as well. I've had so many gay guys tell me what is and isn't transphobic. And it's like, okay, you... fuckboy, you shut your mouth, sit down and fucking listen, alright? It doesn't always work, unfortunately, but yeah, there is so much of this, the fragility, which is just writ large in so many ways and provides such a fucking obstacle for so many members of the community, and I find it so infuriating, and doubly so for you, I'm quite sure.
It's like you have the benefit of getting that fragility both from cis-het people and LGBT people as well. So,
Yeah, I've definitely dealt with it with a few people I know in my life when it comes to the fragility of being called out for LGBT phobia in all its various forms, but wow, to have the whole other thing on top of that.
Yeah, and I think, to go back to an earlier point, that's why it is so important to have spaces where you can be with queer and trans people of colour, because it's finally, for once, a safe space where you don't need to be on your guard or anticipating that someone's going to make a racist joke or a transphobic joke, or, there's just a safety there, which is so needed.
Yeah. Which, I think that's a good point to end it on, I suspect. Cool. I mean, again, Jackson, thank you so much.
That was great. You're awesome.
Oh,
we
thank
love
you
you.
guys. Thank you.
Keep doing the thing, so maybe we'll talk to you again soon. I'm sure we'll catch up. And for the rest of you, I hope you have learned a thing, been given pause for thought, have considered things differently. That is absolutely intention. And we will see you next time in 2 of your Earth weeks. Won't that be fun?
Yes. I'm going to compile a list of all of the things we have referenced today, including, hopefully including a list of various resources, so you could be a better ally to trans people of colour and people of colour in general. Let's get the message out there. If you want to contact the podcast, you can get us on Twitter at @WhatTheTrans. You can get us on Facebook /WhatTheTrans. You can get in contact with us on the website whatthetranspod.tumblr.com. And come send us your stuff. If you know any of those trans prisoners, get in touch. If you've got a story, get in touch. We want to hear from you. And I'm pointing at my raw recording device as if that is you. But it's not. I keep doing that. I flourish at the imaginary audience that aren't here. But I think that's it for this bi-week.
Can I give a cheeky shout out?
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I was going to ask you if you had anything to plug. Plug your pluggables.
So first of all, I want to give a shout out to my wonderful friend Annie, without whom I would never have come to realise that I am indeed trans enough. But also, aside from that, I just want to plug... Actually, no, that's it. I think that's it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Shout out to Annie. You're great.
Annie sounds awesome.
Annie does sound awesome. Thanks, Annie. All right, super. Well, we'll see you all next time. Have a super fortnight. Don't get into too much trouble. And if you do get into trouble, make sure it's the absolutely awesome kind of trouble that gets you in the newspapers and stuff. Like Egg Boy. So, yes, good night. Goodbye. Ta-ta.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.